Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Linda, and I'm originally from Michigan, now living in the St. Louis metro area. I'm a college coach with School Match for You and have a daughter at University of Chicago.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy has a bachelor's degree from the University of Georgia and a master's degree from North Carolina State University. She works in private practice in Raleigh as a mental health therapist. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Good afternoon, friends. I'm going to have an update for you on my health that I will share some insights from an event I attended at Emory that 5 colleges presented at. I think you'll find very interesting. And we're starting a brand new interview Lisa did with Brian Bertges, making the positive case for the value of fraternities, as Lisa peppers Brian with some tough questions about fraternities. But I want to start by thanking all of you who have asked me about my health. I told you that I'd give you monthly updates. I started this new program August 1st, and September is here, so it's time for my update. First of all, my knee is healing well. I'm expecting a full recovery in 3 months. I have a little bit of a limp and a little pain, but literally less than 1/100th of what I had before. I feel like I'm on way to a full recovery. I just have to do my physical therapy. If I would be a good patient, I'd probably be better now. So that's all I need to do, but that's on its way to recovery. Now let's talk about how I'm doing with the weight loss program. Well, I can humbly announce that every day for the whole entire month of August, I entered every single morsel that I ate into the Lose It app. And I know some of you are thinking, that sounds like a hassle. That sounds like a pain. Well, it's not actually that hard because, first of all, now everything's so high tech, there's like a scanner. So you can just scan the package and with the barcode and it puts it right in for you. And once you've got it into your database, you never have to do it again. So it's just initially getting everything in. And I've done this for years, so I have pretty much every food that I've ever eaten already in there. So I can, like I said, humbly announce that I did lose 9.4 pounds in the month of August. So I still have 70.6 to go to get to that 80 that Dave and my daughter challenged me on. But so far, I'm off to a good start. And I say humbly because I really believe motivation is a gift from God. You know, it's God's grace, because sometimes you have it and sometimes you don't. But my daughter, Karis, sent a great quote to me this week that I thought was really profound. And I want to read this quote to you. Motivation comes and goes. Discipline sticks. Love you. That's pretty deep. And I know that that's true. And I know some people, wonder, like, why'd you go so public and put all your business out there like that? Well, there's a couple reasons. One, hopefully you want to inspire somebody else to make the same commitment before it's too late. And also, I personally need the accountability. I know that I'm putting this out there, and I want you guys asking me the tough questions. I had several text messages and emails from people in the last month. How's your health? How's the weight loss? And they'd share their own stories. Some of them are just really moving. Just got an email this week from someone who told me that he had ballooned up to 330 pounds before he went on a walking program. So I want to both inspire, but I also need you asking me the tough questions. So I give you permission. I'll put my cell phone right out there, 404-664-4340, 404-664-4340. Feel free to text me. You can email me. I want that, and I need that accountability, because right now I'm in the zone, but I know from past experiences that sometimes the motivation tends to flounder. And that's when you really need to rely on your accountability structure. So I'm also super competitive. And, I update Anitra, Karis, and Joy every 10 days with my updates. I have to say whether I entered every morsel of food. And I forgot to mention this. I have to stay under my calorie cap, which I think is 2314 right now. And if I miss on one day, I have to give them a fine. So, it's funny. I created this system and I said, I'll tell you what, I pay you $1 if I mess up. I know I'm competitive, so I kind of know that I won't. And then Joy was like, 1, how about 3? So I made it $3 to each of them if I ever mess up. And then she said, Dad, I don't care about $3. I just care about your health. And then I also update Norman and Dave every 10 days as well. So I got 5 people that are getting these updates just in case I get weak. All right, enough about that. I didn't want me to harp on that so long, but I promised you guys monthly updates. You can expect to hear from me first week of October, and you'll see how many pounds I lost in the month of September. Okay, friends, I want to tell you about an event I attended this week. I like to go to these events when a group of colleges come together and they kind of share cutting edge issues, what's going on in their mission offices. And these are college counselor events, and you can ask them the tough questions. And so I attended a luncheon at the Emory Conference Hotel, and it had 5 schools: Emory, Rice, WashU, Cornell, and Pomona. So you've got most of those schools are medium-sized research universities, private, highly selective, and then Pomona being a West Coast school, highly selective liberal arts and sciences, smaller, much smaller. And I was debating after I heard this, wow, I think I have 3 weeks worth of content off of this thing. That's how good it was. But I'm going to just take 2 weeks and share with you some things. And so this week, what I want to talk to you about are 3 themes that emerged that were hit over and over and over again. And they were affordability, affirmative action, and test optional. Where are we headed? And so in some cases, I will quote the school and what the school actually said. If I think it was something they would regard as confidential, then I'm not going to do that. I mean, obviously it's not confidential. They're sharing it with a group of college counselors. But if it's something that I think they might not appreciate me broadcasting all over the world like this, then I won't share the name of the person or the school. But this was a group of college counselors that were mostly school-based throughout Metro Atlanta. I used to be at a CBO, you guys know that, but I was the only one that I recognized there that was an independent educational counselor. I think the others were mostly all school-based. I knew a good number of them. I'm not saying I was the only one. I just didn't recognize anybody else. There were also some CBO counselors there as well, community-based organizations. And so on affordability, the main thing I want to say here is colleges are very conscious of the fact that they're pricing people out. And all of these counselors wanted to let us know what they're doing about it. So Emory started out talking about how, now this has been now for 2 years, but not everybody knows about it, that they now meet full demonstrated need without loans. So they used to do that for incomes under 50K. Now they do it without loans for all U.S. citizens and undocumented students. Like I said, that's a 2-year-old new development, but like I said, with the pandemic, not everybody knows about it. And they have a new, now a lot of people might wonder, what does need blind mean? Well, I'm going to borrow from Peter Van Buskirk, who's such a good communicator. We've had him on the podcast before. I like his definition. It means they read your application without looking at your wallet. So they do read need blind for the Emory campus, and they read need aware for the Oxford campus. And, another time we'll go into detail on that. I do have a commitment from a senior level person at Emory to come on the podcast. In fact, we were in touch this week about the details. So we can get into more of that there. They do have a change. They've always had an MLK scholarship for students from the Atlanta public school system. That MLK scholarship, which is full cost of attendance, now extends to Metro Atlanta. The point is, all the schools were bragging about their expanded financial aid. Cornell really had the most points they made. So I don't know if you listeners know this. I know we haven't talked about that, what I'm going to say right now, very much on the podcast, although I have an expert coming on to talk about simplified FAFSA. You have to go all the way back to Mark Kantrowitz, where we first introduced simplified FAFSA, but it's about to be here. So I've got an expert from Aspire coming on to talk about that with you guys. But only the most diligent people probably know this, but the new simplified FAFSA is going to really hit farmers hard. It's the way assets are calculated. And in the past, family farms were protected or shielded from the formula. And now they're not going to be protected or shielded from I'm going to say EFC probably for a while. What used to be EFC and is about to be Student Aid Index. It's basically a number that calculates how much they think you should be able to pay after studying your income and assets. And so what Cornell wanted us to know is that they are still going to package students from rural communities, from farms, the same way as they previously did. The FAFSA formula won't do it, but they're just going to take more of their own need-based aid and make the difference. So you're going to be hearing a lot of schools do that. I'm fully expecting schools to do this when there's multiple kids in college, which is another change in the new FAFSA. Expect the wealthier schools to say, we'll make up the gap with our own need-based aid and do things the way we did before. But they made the announcement about family farms. They also wanted people to know that previously, if you made under $65,000, you didn't have any family contribution at all. They covered everything, and now they've upped that to $75,000. So for incomes of under $75,000, they're covering everything. By the way, I know some people are like, how are they doing that? Like, aren't they going to go broke? I mean, the average family makes $68,000 for a family of four. How can they cover everything for under $75K? That's because it's so hard to get through these processes at these schools if you're not well resourced, that it ends up being a small number of people that fit in that bucket. But anyway, another financial commitment there. Then this is something that some of you may know. We've talked about a little, but not a lot. If you apply to a school that requires the CSS profile, College Scholarship Search Profile, a College Board product, which is about 180 schools, the wealthiest schools in the country, 173 of them are private. What they do is they build into their package a summer work expectation for students. So they break out a parent contribution versus a student contribution, and every school has a different figure, how much they feel a student should earn over the summer that goes to college, not just earn over the summer for beach money and movie money and date money and all of that, but they actually goes to college. And so Cornell wants us to know that they are going to be decreasing their student contribution, which, by the way, I have all the student contributions, at least for the 50 wealthiest schools, and Cornell's was a little bit on the high side. Those contributions range from zero at some places like Davidson and Rice and UVA to some like Brown and Columbia and Cornell would get in the 3,000 to 4,000 range. So they're decreasing that student contribution. And then the other thing that they're doing is they're taking students that have unpaid internships over the summer, and they'll be funding their unpaid internships. So, like I said, every school was bragging about their increasing their robust financial aid. So Rice announced that last year, they went to no loans at all incomes. And of course, they were reiterating that. They also wanted students to know about the Rice investment for incomes of $200,000 or less, and how generous they were to families that make under $200,000 or less. So that's a 2019 initiative. So that one's not brand new. Some of these are brand new, some are not. WashU bragged about the fact that Princeton Review rated them the #1 school for affordability and in their new rankings. And WashU also said that they have some new announcements that are coming out very, very shortly. They're not going to be able to say it quite yet, but it's going to be groundbreaking initiatives for middle income students to make college more affordable for middle income students. The point is, everybody's trying to hear what people are saying about the cost of college and doing what they can. Now, these are the most well-resourced schools in the country. All right. And Pomona did reinforce the fact that they are also no loans as well, which is a only a couple dozen schools in the country that have the resources for that. All right, let's talk about affirmative action. So this is probably might surprise you, but if you heard what I said when affirmative action first broke out, I said I see schools breaking into three groups. Group number one, it's like no change whatsoever. This would be of several different schools. It would be the schools, public schools in the 9 states that already outlawed affirmative action. And then there was a group of other schools that voluntarily chose to not implement affirmative action, even though the state had not had a policy. And then there's some that are fairly indifferent. And so there's that group that was like the announcement was like, yawn, it doesn't change anything that we do. Then there's a second group that practiced affirmative action and really believes in it, but because of fear of lawsuits, they're going to really curtail what they do when it comes to diversity recruitment. And then there's the third group that saw that clause, if you want to use the word clause, that was in the Supreme Court decision that said if somebody can show how their race impacted their experience, then it can be factored in. And I actually thought there's going to be a lot of schools in group 2, at least for year 1 or 2, out of fear of lawsuit. Well, after listening to this group, most schools are in group 3. And this is a group that's pretty progressive. But they were all absolutely, unapologetically, unequivocally reaffirming their diversity commitment, and in some cases with really little change. So one person who was at the event said, I'm an attorney, and the decision basically said that we can't use a box checking to give somebody credit for their racial background. Guess what? We weren't doing that anyway. So for all intents and purposes, nothing has really changed. That was a misperception. We weren't just giving somebody credit because they checked a box. We needed to see how their racial identity was impacting their experience in the first place. And that's all the Supreme Court reaffirmed. There was a bit of a debate and some different opinions as to whether or not a student had to explicitly put it in their writing in order for a school to give credit for that. Some people felt, no, they don't. They don't need to do that. We can see it in other places. We can see it in their activities. We can see it through what a counselor says. It doesn't have to be explicitly in the writing. One person even said that if a student talked about their involvement in Jack and Jill, which is an upper middle class social and educational organization for Black students to provide positive role models for them, then we couldn't include that. So the schools were very, very clear that they were not backing down from their diversity commitment at all. Pomona talked about the virtual fly-in program when they spoke up. During the question and answer period, I put up my hand and I said, a major decision was made 60 days ago on affirmative action. I know you're all talking to your general counsel. I said, what are they telling you can do and you can't do? And the person said, who answered it, knows me, said, I knew I shouldn't call on you. I knew you were going to ask a question like that. So nobody wanted to touch it at first. Everybody wasn't going near it. But then when they got into talking about it, they opened up. And they, let loose what they actually think and what their schools actually believe. So there was one school that said our president just reiterated our commitment. Actually, I can tell you who this is. It was Rice. They reiterated the commitment to diversity. We have a whole new custom question that gives students a chance to talk about their lived experience and how it impacts their life journeys because of our reiterating our commitment to diversity. And so Wash U talked about their commitment to bringing in Questbridge kids who are socioeconomically diverse and often racially diverse. So Wash U used to bring in 65 Questbridge kids 2 years ago. Last year, they upped it to 75. They're looking to bring 100 plus this year. So they reaffirmed that commitment, and colleges love Questbridge kids because they recruit such incredibly talented kids from under-resourced backgrounds. Now, once again, that's a race-blind program, and I think you'll see more of that because it's a race-blind program. So when you actually look at the numbers within Questbridge, white and Asian are larger than Black, but there's a good mixture of everybody in there. But you're going to see a lot of that. WashU reaffirmed the fact that they are 51% students of color, 16% first gen, 20% under-resourced, and we want to see those numbers grow. Cornell talked about the fact that the Supreme Court decision has nothing to do with recruitment, nothing to do with yield. It only has to do with how we read a file. WashU was touting their fly-in program for diversity. And so unabashedly, they all said, we are committed to this work. And they saw the Supreme Court decision as just giving them clear parameters to work, and it wasn't going to hinder them. So I thought you might find that interesting. And then the last thing I want to talk about is test scores, because I know these things are all interesting. I could talk about AI because we talked about that a lot as well, but I'll talk about test scores. So if anybody thinks that with the arrival of the digital SAT, which does have some advantages, I do think students are going to like that it's almost an hour and a half shorter by the time you count instructions. And I think they're going to like getting their scores back really quickly. And these students are so used to being on a computer, I think they're going to like that too. But there is no sign at all that these schools are going back toward testing. So Emory said we're test optional for the class of 2024 and 2025. And we'll go from there. Rice said the same thing through the class of 2024 and then 2025, and we'll go through there. WashU said we're test optional only through 2024, but I'm fully expecting an announcement from the chancellor to say that we will be going test optional for the foreseeable future. That should be coming out in the fall. Pomona said we're test optional through 2024, and we will be having an announcement coming up, in the next, it was less than a year. I can't remember if they said 6 months, but it's coming up, not immediately, but, into early 2024. Cornell bragged about the fact that 3 of their scores are score-free. Remember, score-free, test blind, all used interchangeably, right? It means that they don't see scores even if you want to send them. So their School of Arts and Sciences, the School of Business, and the College of Architecture, Art, and Planning, all of those are score-free. Just using their term, it's tough. You got to get used to test blind, score-free, test-free, but people that's why we do admissions vernacular on Thursdays. Okay. And then all their other schools are test optional. And here's a pretty stunning stat from Cornell. They bragged about the fact that only 30% of all their students submitted test scores last year. 30%. 70% did not. So once again, the reaffirmation of test optional looks like the momentum is only picking up. And so those are just some insights from the session I had. I'm going to come back next week and share some other insights on a completely different topic that I hope you'll find interesting.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Okay, friends, we have a whole brand new interview. And Lisa's interviewing Brian Bertges. He's the executive director of Theta Delta Chi International Fraternity. And they're talking about Greek life. And in part 1 of Lisa's interview, Brian gives his backstory. Then Brian shares his own experience with joining a fraternity as a freshman. And it is quite a story indeed. Brian explains the value of a fraternity when it comes to this college student's experience. And Brian answers the questions, do fraternities have a drinking problem? Finally, Lisa asked Brian, how often do fraternities go rogue and not follow their own values? Listen and enjoy.
Hi, this is Lisa. I am one of the co-hosts of Your College Bound Kid, and I'm excited today to be here with Brian Bertges, who is the Executive Director of Theta Delta Chi International Fraternity. He's going to talk to us about Greek life today. Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It is an absolute pleasure to be here.
Well, tell us about your background and how you ended up being the Executive Director of the fraternity organization.
Yeah, so I was joining the organization back in 1996, just a few moons ago. And after I joined the organization and left, graduated from college, I went off to teach for America. And I realized how much I love to make a difference in education. Afterwards, I ended up going into research and policy for veteran student life. I got into the job because I was an undergraduate at Penn State University in the Theta Delta Chi fraternity, really loved my experience. After I left college and graduated, I ended up getting selected to go into Teach for America. I realized how much I love to make a difference in people's lives, particularly in education. After I left education for a little stint, I did research and policy for the American Legion for Veterans Affairs and Rehabilitation. I was in the United States Army for 4 years, loved the military and the experience that it gave me. Probably one of the best decisions in my life that I made, other than joining a fraternity. Then I realized I wanted to go back into education and ended up getting a job at the University of Maryland working in the veteran space. So I combined two passions that I had, military and education. And I was getting my master's degree and my fraternity reached out. I was a board member, did a lot of the leadership facilitation at the Preamble Institute, which I could talk about later if interested. And they called me and said, would you like to come back to the fraternity as the president of the board? Because I was the president earlier, probably about 5 to 10 years earlier. And I said, no, I wanted to finish my master's degree. And eventually they called me up and I had a conversation with the president of the Educational Foundation. And they really wanted me to be the executive director. And he had a conversation with me about the fraternity and said, what would you like to do? What's your vision with our organization? And I shared it with him. And he said, listen, I want you to work for the fraternity. I want you to be the executive director. And that's why I'm meeting with you today. And I thought about it. My brother just passed from cancer. And it was a life choice to go and pursue something I was passionate about. So my wife, who loves hot weather, I had to go home and say to her and say, honey, I just was offered a job. If you want to take it, it's up in Boston, Massachusetts, one of the coldest places that you could go to. And she said, go for it. And so I became the executive director of the fraternity, and it's been happily ever after from that point.
Now, tell me about your own entry into the fraternity world in college.
That is such an amazing story. I was, as they would say, rushing different fraternities. That meant that I was interested in joining one. And I was rushing about 7 or 8 different fraternities. And I got really sick when I was a freshman. I was inside my residence hall. Some people call them dorm rooms. And I couldn't walk. I was really sick. I could barely move. And everybody kept calling me out to invite me to an event, a recruitment event. And, you know, they would undoubtedly say, would you like to come out for a cookout? And I would say the same thing every single time they called. I'm sick. I can barely walk. But when I feel better, I'll come back out. And that was the repeat, whether it was hanging out, playing video games, whatever the case may be, until Michael Krust from Theta Delta Chi called. And it was amazing because I gave the same standard response. I'm sick. I can barely walk. I'll come out when I feel better. And his reaction and his response was totally different. He said, do you need to go to the hospital? I thought for a second, yes. And within 15 minutes, he showed up with 2 other brothers, Todd Wirt and Matt Kirkland, I think was the other guy's name. And in the 1996 cherry red Honda Civic, they drove me to the hospital. And this was a time when cell phones weren't pervasive for anybody that's listening that has cell phones. They had to call my parents and tell them that I was in the hospital. And they said, your son's in the hospital. He's okay. They need the insurance. And I want you to picture a rotary phone for, you know, in the number for my house was 717-889-5805. So if you made a mistake in that, it would take another 5 minutes for you to call. And from that moment, I knew that I belonged and they cared for me, right? Genuine care is what made me realize that Theta Delta Chi was the only choice for me.
Yeah, that is such an amazing story. You know, it kind of restores my faith in humanity a little bit, which is needed on certain days. So, but I love that story so much. And I mean, that's sort of brotherhood at its finest, right? You know, and just like that he was the only one of all the people who called you even thought to help was kind of amazing.
Yeah, it was beautiful. And I love that guy to this day.
Yeah. So once you joined the fraternity, it seems like things went very well after that for you. And of course, you've not really left that world in some ways. But, I guess Greek life is a bit controversial. People have lots of opinions about it. It's also complicated, right? Because, all the different organizations are different too. But in general, what do you see as some of the advantages of participating in Greek life for students?
Yeah, Lisa, I want to start off by saying that the issues that are associated, you mentioned that, fraternities get branded in a certain way. The issues associated with fraternity aren't solely fraternities and sororities. It's a greater higher education, high school issue. So I want to say the stereotypes that are associated with fraternities are not just for fraternities, but because they're organizations, it's easier to look at them and put them under greater scrutiny. And I agree that they should be, right? We're a values-based organization. So if we aspire or espouse different things, then we should be there. That being set aside, I think the benefits of fraternity that exist, particularly in today's world with the lockdown or pandemic, as you would say, really showed a lot of depression, created some mental health issues. Fraternity men and sorority women have better rates of depression and anxiety than their non-fraternal peers. And I think that's a really big thing in today's world. They have greater social connection. So we have these things that are in our pockets that really cause distractions in our lives, telephones. And social skills are greatly needed in this day and age. And, fraternities and sororities create an atmosphere where you are more likely to be present with one another, which leads to better employment, quicker employment. It's not just having the information and the knowledge that you gain in the classroom, it's being able to articulate that to other people. And, in a world where in business, people don't do business with organizations, they do business with people. So they have to be able to see that you're competent, but also trustworthy. And I think that fraternities really allow you to manage and understand conflict, human relationships, leadership and group dynamics, academics, and retention for a parent that wants to make sure that their money is going to the right place. There's a higher retention rate for freshmen if they join fraternities and sororities. There's a higher completion rate. So you're more likely to graduate because you have a social network, a support network that people can help get you through challenges that you may otherwise be left alone in your resident hall room trying to battle it out yourself.
Yeah, I think that we have seen more and more that isolation and loneliness are a big part of the American emotional landscape. And so I can see how a fraternity or a sorority is like a structured social organization that kind of have all these pathways towards connection. And that would help people stay in college and do better in school. So what about parties? Now, fraternities are known for their parties, but you mentioned something to me in our pre-interview that I thought was interesting about regulation of parties. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so many organizations, in fact, any NIC fraternity organization is going to have their own policies and guidelines, as well as the IFC, which is the Interfraternity Council. That's the umbrella organization of the students on the campus, as well as the host institution. Registration of events, the type of alcohol that can be provided, if you're of age or not of age. There's many, many different guidelines and restrictions that come into place for a fraternity or sorority to host events. And if you think about it in the sense of an apartment social function, there are no rules. They can have open source alcohol. It could be grain alcohol, 80 proof, whatever, and there's nobody really watching it. And, if you look at the number of deaths related to alcohol in higher education, how many do you think there are? Right? Like there's major cases in news stories, which mostly every single one of them are attached to a fraternity, which maybe is 1 to 5 stories that you hear about fraternities. But there's roughly about 1,500 to 1,800 deaths of college students annually associated with alcohol. So there are no regulations outside the fraternity. And perhaps if we really focused on the fraternities leading a movement, and they're meeting the expectations of every other student on campus, and those students tend to pregame and walk into a fraternity event, and we have to help them to understand that there are social host liability laws associated with people walking into your space. And we have to say, if you're going to come into our space and we notice that you're overserved, we're going to call for help. And that is something that I feel would be very beneficial. But fraternities, by and large, are the safer social outlet to be.
Yeah, that's so interesting because, of course, that's not what popular opinion is. But then, you're presenting us with some data that says that at least fraternities are accountable, right, to the school, to their national organization, whereas like some guy in his apartment, is accountable, I guess, to the police, but
perhaps.
Right. Maybe. Yeah. So that's really interesting, I think. Do you find that as the executive director of a fraternity, how often do you find that fraternities chapters go rogue or don't follow the mission and uphold the values?
Well, that's a really good question. And can I ponder that for a moment?
Absolutely. Ponder away.
The going rogue aspect, I would say, isn't necessarily they're going rogue. It's a series of decisions that end them up in a certain location. And when I think about my organization as a whole, all the organizations that are doing things that would be antithetical to the values, they're doing it in comparison to other people. And I just got back from Seattle. I was at the University of Washington hanging out with my guys over there. And the house was not up to standard, in my humble opinion, of what I would expect, which is closer to what I keep my home. I have a higher standard for our members. And, they said, well, Rushies, everybody that comes over our house says that we're the cleanest of all the groups. And I said, well, if you're comparing yourself to filthy people, then you are slightly better than filthy. So, we changed their perspective and their mindset of what it is that they're involved of. And that's what I was talking about. Higher education as a whole earlier isn't necessarily healthy. Our culture in America isn't necessarily healthy, right? And Jiddu Krishnamurti, his quote, "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." I'm challenging the members because the going rogue isn't necessarily them being bad people, but they're just involved in a setting that asks them to put away their own values. In Gestalt theory, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, right? Individually, all of the people that I talk to will say what they want to be, their aspirations, how they want to improve intellectually, morally, and socially. But at the end of the day, when they get into a larger group, belongingness is why fraternities exist. And sometimes they do things that they wouldn't normally do because they want to belong. And they have to understand that you already belong and you can say something. So when they go rogue, I think it's just people comparing themselves to others and say, we don't do this, they're way worse than us. But the reality is other people say that too. And that's something that we can change just by having them reflect on themselves and what they actually want to be, right? We're aspirational organizations. So if you set a target, right, we're teleological beings. If you set a target to where you want to go, that's where you go. And if we set those targets in the right places, then we go in the right places. So one thing that my organization's doing is we have improvement plans. So we're sitting down with the chapter presidents. We call them charge presidents. And we have them pick 3 areas that they want to work in and set 3 SMART goals in each area. And we're going to meet with them every single month to say, did you do what you said you would do? And if we replace, right, the law of substitution, you can't be happy or angry at the same time. If we do positive actions, then if you're doing positive actions, then you can't do a negative action at the same time. So by setting healthy targets where they want to go, we have a healthier organization. So I wouldn't say that people intentionally do bad things. Nobody intentionally does bad things, but I think structure, if you look higher above, that's where the problems come in. And then they just want to fit in and be cool. And we have to make them want to choose to be great instead.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent point. And I'm intrigued by your assessment of, sort of the unhealthy aspects of our society when it comes to, I guess, higher education.
Friends, this concludes part 1 of Lisa's interview with Brian Bertges, the executive director of Theta Delta Chi International Fraternity. We hope you'll join us next week for part 2 of 3. On Thursday's episode, Mark Hatch and Susan Tree continue their conversation on decade by decade. How has admissions changed? Last week, they covered the 80s and the 90s. This week, they'll cover from 2000 to 2010, 2010 to 2020, and 2020 through 2023. A question from a listener comes from Brandy from Houston, and she wants to know any advice for my student who's attended a small high school that's been kind of sheltered, and now he's looking at going to a really large school with large class sizes. And Julie and I will tackle that question. Julie and I will also continue our interview with Lee Coffin, and we're asking him tough questions about college admissions. And this is part 3 of 4. And we'll have the final part of Kevin Newton's interview on clearing and the UCAS system. So we hope you'll join us on Thursday for that episode. And friends, when it comes to choosing a college, I want you to think of choosing a college the same way you think of trying on a pair of shoes at a shoe store. Whatever ranking magazine says about the top shoes, does that really matter if when you try the shoe on, it hurts your foot? Whatever your best friend thinks about that pair of shoes, does that really matter if when you try the shoe on, it doesn't fit your foot? The point is, block out the noise, block out all the other voices who are trying to tell you what to do. And remember, you're the one who's going to live with the experience. Now, you do need to be on the same page with your parents because they're paying for it. And they also have your best interests at heart. So they have some say. But I'm talking about all the other outside forces and sources. And remember that college is a match to be made and not a prize to be won. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stylianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.